And up until now, what we've done has been pretty passive. We've gone to pages, we've found elements, we've interrogated them, got their attributes, done a little bit of investigation around there. But we haven't really been able to do the meat of what you have to do in an automation, which is click on stuff, right? And that's what we're going to learn how to do now. So when I pass on this next slide, we are just going to get overwhelmed by manipulation methods. But we're not. And the reason we're not is that the WebDriver API is pretty clean and pretty simple. When you have a web element, the simplest manipulation commands are click, clear, send keys, and submit if it's a form. So if I want to navigate around a site, I will find an element that is an anchor and I will click on it. If I want to manipulate a button, I will find an element that is the button and I will click on it. If I want to submit a form, I will find the element that is the submit button and I will click on it. If I want to deal with radio buttons, I will find the element and I will click on it. This is different from the old days with Selenium where we had commands for everything. We had commands for set checkbox, set radio button, and click on a button and wait, do this thing, then this next thing. We had a huge array of commands. So the web element has really simplified over the last few releases. And this is the core set of manipulation functions. And with this, you can become overconfident with your automation really quickly. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how to be overconfident with automation really quickly. So I have a form at compendiumdev.co.uk/selenium/basic-ajax.html, and I know that manually I can select the server, then I can select Java, then I can submit, then I will see a page that shows me the details in the form that I've submitted. So I think I can pretty much automate all of that with a .click to click on the drop downs and the submit button and the previous interrogation commands that we've done. So I am going to do that now. So here we are, a pretty basic form. I have a category. I'm going to select server. That was just a find that element, click on it. Now I'm going to select Java, find that element, click on it. A code init button. I'm going to find that element. I'm going to click on it. And then all I'm going to do is interrogate this page and see the values. What could be simpler? So the first thing I have to do is I am going to inspect this element with Firebug. So I can see here that I have got a select combo 1 and I have got an option value 3. So let me just make a note of this in my scratch pad. So I'm going to call this at test my first manipulation. Yes. So I've gone to the page up here. So all I really want to do is find an element. So I'm just going to put this down as comments just now. So I think I need to find an element where it is option value 3 for server. Let's see if I can copy paste that. I'm going to stop maximizing that just now so that I can swap back and forward between these a little bit more easily. There we go. Find element option value 3. Great. Then all I have to do, once I clicked on server, I find server, there we go, I find Java in the list. So let me inspect that. I can see that is option value 23. Then it's pretty much just a case of I want to click on that code init button So that is input type submit value code name submit button. That should be enough information. Oh, I could copy the X path if I want. Let's see what that does. Input form input, yeah, don't really want that. I will use the name, I think. I'm going to find element with the name equal to that. And then I'm going to click on it. So that's pretty much that form done. Then, once all those things are in place, all I have to do is check that the language ID is 20. So let's see. So I'm going to look for that. Great. So let's build a test that does that. This should be set. We know how to do this. Driver dot find element by, and remember we want to use CSS selectors as much as possible. Let's get rid of that additional brackets there. So the CSS selector, remember we are going to select option value 3. So I want tag option attribute value equal 3. I'm just going to copy paste this because I'm doing driver find element all the way through. In fact, what I want to do is I want to click on that. There we go. I found the element. Find element returns a web element, therefore I can just go straight and click it. No need for any intermediate variables when we're coding, because we are hitting this hard and fast. Great, so then I want to find element, the option value 23, that's what we found in our investigation. So now I want to click on that submit button. Now I have a choice. Do I use the CSS selector and get the name, or do I drop down to a by.name? Yeah, I'm going to drop down to a name, because that's going to make things fairly obvious in terms of the test. So now you can make your choices as you go through and do your own automation, but I am doing .name because that is making this super clear. Right, so next thing I want to do, so I have selected server, I have selected Java, I have clicked the submit button. Now what I want to do is check the language that we picked. So I want to say assert that driver dot, oops, let's bring that in. Hello static import driver dot find the element by, so I can see an ID there. Let's use the ID. In fact, let's do this CSS, shall we? So the ID hash to turn that into an ID, because we remember our CSS selectors, right? So I want to assert that the get text from this is 20, because that was the language. Alright, that was easy. So now I am just going to debug through this test. So there we go, page has opened, we're on the driver, so let's find the element and click on it. Let me put this really short so you can see it in action side by side. So to debug, I'm going to step over this find element click command. There we go, it's clicked on server. That was what we wanted. So now we're going to click on Java. There we go. Now we're going to click on submit button. There's the form. Let's assert that. And it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Expected is 20 and we got 23. Why did I think we needed 20? Maybe when I did it manually it didn't work, because clearly if I select value 23, I'm expecting value 23. How did we get value 23? Oh, that's the wrong one, isn't it? So let me do this manually again. I want to make sure, I don't just want to change the test, I want to double check that this is all okay. So let me refresh this. I want to select the server. I want to select Java. I want to code in that. Language ID 23. Okay, so I must have done the manual test incorrect. So this test now is correct. So let me debug this. See, I was a little bit overconfident there. I thought I knew what I was doing, but we learned. And now that we've learned that what we're doing with these IDs is correct, we should be fine. Let me just bring that partially in, move this over. We can debug through it and see the test in action. So I'm going to step over the find element click. It's clicked server, great. Now I'm going to click on the Java. There we go, we've got Java. Now I'm going to click on the submit button. There we go, and we've got language 23 and the test should pass. Everything is green. Alright. So now, clearly, all we do is we check that into our version control system and run it as part of continuous integration. So let me just run that. And the joy of multiple monitors means you did not see the browser come up there. However, it failed. The test failed because it was unable to find one of the elements, but we were doing so well. It's the second one. Now, clearly, if you were watching, you saw what was going on. This is an Ajax form. When I click on the Java server, there's a wait happens in the background. When I do a debug, I go through it nice and slowly so that everything happens. So while we know the commands, we know the basic manipulation commands, and I can now manipulate things on the screen, we need to learn a little bit more before we go all out and say, yes, we can automate the web. We need to learn a little bit about synchronization and the WebDriver wait command. So allow me to introduce you to the WebDriver wait. WebDriver wait is the mechanism that we're going to use most of the time to introduce synchronization into our tests. And I'm going to show you the simplest way of using WebDriver wait. It's a helper class. There's another helper class that we can use called expected conditions. So if you look at this code at the bottom here, this is a very simple synchronization statement that says, create a new WebDriver wait for this particular driver, and I want you to wait for 10 seconds, a maximum of 10 seconds. If the condition is met before that, then the wait will stop early. If the condition is not met after the 10 seconds are up, it will throw an exception. So I'm basically saying wait for 10 seconds using this driver until the title is HTML form elements. And we're using a helper class called expected conditions, which is a whole bunch of helpful synchronization methods. So here is a bigger example of the WebDriver wait, and I'm going to show you the code in just a second. So here in the context of a test, I'm getting a driver. I'm constructing a WebDriver wait with a driver and a timeout. I don't really need to do that final assert. So although I'm waiting until the title is HTML form elements, I don't really need to then assert on the title, because WebDriver wait throws a timeout exception if the expected condition is not met. So I know that if we exit the WebDriver wait and we haven't thrown an exception, that assert will pass because that is what the title is, because it has to be. And if that assert fails, then it basically means that the expected condition's title is method doesn't work properly. So let me just have a quick look at that example test for you. So here it is in context. Now I'm just going to quickly show you. Here I'm starting up WebDriver wait with a 10-second delay. Here I'm doing pretty much exactly the same test, but I'm doing a WebDriver wait with a 10-second wait, and I'm saying poll every 50 milliseconds. The way that WebDriver wait works is it polls periodically to see if the expected condition has been met or not. And here I'm telling it to poll every 50 milliseconds. Now if I jump down, I'm going to have a quick look in the code here. In fact, before we do that, here I'm doing expected condition for the title is. If I do a control space on here, we can see that I have a bunch of expected conditions. I can do expected condition wait until an element is clickable, wait until invisibility of an element located. Okay, wait until an element is present, wait until the text is present in an element. These change and people add to them more, and the names are clearly intelligible. What does that one do? An expectation for checking that an element is either invisible or not present on the DOM. Okay, so I use that one for checking if the element is invisible or not present. Invisibility of element located. Okay. Naming could probably be improved on that one. But we have a bunch of them here. So when you start out, I recommend that you look at the expected conditions and see if any there match what you're doing. Because chances are you're doing something fairly common. A lot of the time we're waiting for the title. A lot of the time we're waiting for text to be there. A lot of the time we're waiting for an element to actually be on the page. Sometimes clearly we're waiting for an element to not be on the page. So have a look through these and see what is suitable. Later on we will show you how to write your own expected conditions and to use ad hoc code in here in your WebDriver wait. But when you start working with WebDriver wait, this is the kind of construct to build. A new WebDriver wait for a time period until an expected condition has been met. Now the WebDriver wait itself is a class that extends Fluent Wait, and we will cover Fluent Wait in more detail later. You can see that by default, the WebDriver wait has a default pausing time of 500 milliseconds. That's what this is saying here. Okay, that's your basic introduction to the WebDriver wait. I'm going to quickly show you an example manipulation test, and then we're going to work through the initial exercises for manipulation for you. You've pretty much already seen a manipulation test when I did it in that overconfident fashion. But what we're going to do, and the basic form we're going to use is the basic HTML form. So you can see from this example, I find an element, I may interrogate it, I use some manipulation methods on it, and that's pretty much it. You may need to use some WebDriver synchronization, but you'll see from the exercise itself. Here's that test in context. All this one does, in fact let's get the page up. So this is the basic HTML form. It has most of the form elements that you'll find in HTML, very simple formatting. It has a submit button, a cancel button, and when you submit it takes you off to a page that shows you the details of what you've typed in so you can check what you typed in against what was actually submitted. And in this particular test, I go off to that page, I check for checkbox 1 not being selected because it starts as default not, then I click it, then I check that it is selected. That's all that particular test does. Hopefully the exercises you're about to do will ask you to do a little bit more, actually submit, and then check results on the other page. Here are your challenges. I want you to go off to that page, compendiumdev.co.uk/selenium/basic-html form. You've just seen it. Do what I did, which is basically click the submit form and check that the page title changes. Then follow the rest of these exercises. Clear, then type in comments, submit with the radio button too, etc, etc, etc. Just work your way through these exercises. Then for bonus points, because we haven't really covered this yet, submit file, or try and figure out how you can put a file name in there and submit the file and check the name on the output. Give that last one your best shot because we haven't covered it yet. All the rest we have, and you should be able to do it fine. And again, I will show you my answers when we come back. Okay, how did you do? Well, this is quite exciting for me because I have just upgraded Firefox. In between telling you to do the exercise and coming back to show you what I did, I have just upgraded Firefox. Now, the tests were originally written against Firefox 14. They had some issues in Firefox 15 and I had to change them. I have just run them against Firefox 16 and they all ran, but we may have to do some fixing on the fly to demonstrate that although these are very simple tests, I haven't put a lot of rigor in to make them robust against multiple browsers or browser changes, so there may be more synchronization required. So even though these are very simple, did you encounter any synchronization problems? Because when we're working with changing the DOM, even if it's just clicking on a checkbox or choosing something from a drop-down, there is a risk of synchronization problems. Now you may have got away with synchronizing just on the title. On the next page, the process form details page, you may even have got away without any synchronization at all. And that may be because you didn't run the tests very often, if you did get away with it. I know that I had to add additional synchronization points in, and I'm going to show you them in here. But it also depends on what mechanism you use, because some synchronization points are only required for some types of mechanisms. And I'm going to show you that as well. So this is going to be even more exciting than we thought, and I'm actually going to look at each one of the exercises in turn and then run the tests and see if we have to do any rework. So you were asked to start with submitting the form and asserting that the page title changes. So this is the manipulate exercise submit form test. So let me get this up just in case we need it next to it when we're explaining the tests. So we go off to the basic HTML form, which is this one. Now I have chosen to submit the form in as many different ways as I could think of. So the first one is obvious, submitting the form with a button click on the submit button, which is this here. If I inspect element with Firebug, so the submit button, I have chosen to identify it using CSS, saying I want an input tag where the type is submit and the name is submit button. That's pretty specific. It also helps me distinguish between the cancel button, which is also an input type, also has the name submit button, but has a different type. So that makes it very specific that I'm dealing with the submit button. So I'm choosing to submit the form just by finding that submit button and clicking on it. Then I wait for the title. But then I expect the title to happen straight away. I don't even wait. That's kind of automation guy I am. Okay. So then I choose to submit the form with a submit call on the submit button itself. So I do the same thing. I identify the button, then I do the submit call. Because remember, on here I can click, I can do various interrogation commands, I can clear, I can send keys, I can submit. Now I have also chosen to submit the form with a form submit. So I have identified the form itself. So let's double check that in Firefox. So we see over here, the form itself has an ID HTML form elements. So I'm finding that form, find elements by ID HTML form elements, and then I'm doing a submit at the form level on the form itself. I can actually do a submit on anything in the form. That submit bubbles up. So I'm finding the password input and doing a submit on that. And then this is the tricky one. I don't know how many of you tried to do this, but we know that in the real world, let me show you, let's see if we can do this in the real world. If I fill in the form, I'm going to tab through into submit, I can hit the return key, great. I can come through, let me choose one of these, I can tab down, I hit the space key, great, we go through. So I can use the keyboard to submit the form. I cannot do this in Chrome. If I use the Chrome driver, I cannot do this. It does not like me doing this with this current mechanism. What I'm doing is I'm finding the element, same as we did before, submit, submit button. And then all I do is I send keys. Now, what's interesting for me is that normally when I do this manually, I hit the return key. That was how I first coded this. And it worked fine in Firefox 14. It didn't work very well in Firefox 15. Doesn't work at all in Firefox 16. But space does. So I can use the space key to submit the form. But still not in Google Chrome. So it's one of the interesting dilemmas with automation. How far do you go? Like, is it really important that I can submit the form with the keys? In this case, no, because there's no JavaScript, there's nothing custom on the page. All I'm doing at this point is exercising normal browser functionality. And really I don't need to test normal browser functionality. Pretty much if I can submit the form using any of these mechanisms, it's absolutely fine. If my boss turns around to me and says, can you submit the form through automation with a key press? Probably, yeah, but why bother? Because we're not doing anything important with it. It's standard browser functionality, and you can see that even with this very, very simple test, I have added complexity into my test cases. I have, when I put this into continuous integration, to make sure that I don't try and run this against Google Chrome, because it will fail. That's not a problem with the automation. That's, well, it is in fact a problem with the driver. The driver doesn't let me do this, but it doesn't matter. It's not important. I've had to change this from enter to space. And it's not important. That's just happened between releases of the browsers. Nothing to do with the application. It's completely unimportant. So we have to be very careful when we do our automation as to how far we go. So what I'm going to recommend to you is, this is a particularly good lesson in terms of keeping things as simple as possible. Do the simplest thing that works. If submit works, then great. You don't even have to have the focus on it. You don't have to click anything. Just try and submit it because it's a form. And it is semantically very useful in your tests, because you can see that you are submitting the form at that point. You are expecting not just to click on it and have a result, you're expecting the semantic results from what you do to be a submit. So that's probably longer in explanation terms than you actually spent answering question 1, but I think it's important to go through that in a bit more detail. So let me just show you this running. Let me run all those tests. I have my fingers crossed that this works. Hooray! There we go. I'm ignoring this because that's related to the file handling cleanup that happens at the end. All the tests passed. I hope yours did too. If you had any issues, feel free to look to the source code and see what I did differently. You were also asked to clear and then type some comments and then submit the form and check some output. So let's look at that. So I have done this in a number of ways. Let's have a quick look over here. You can see here the form has some comments pre-populated. If I just submit, I get these comments back. So I have a test here which submits the default comments. I come in, I find the submit button, I just hit click, I wait until the page is changed, and then I look on the results in the value comments field and check that comments, the defaults value, has made its way through into the text. I also submit the form with my comments, and to do that I have to find the comments field, then I have to clear it, then I have to send the keys that I want, this is my comment, into that field. Then it's pretty much the same. I submit, I click, I wait until the page has loaded, until the title has changed to the processed form details. Then I check the value in the comments and I make sure it is what I expected. So I expect to receive the string that I put in, and I check based on the get text that is on that page. That's pretty simple. So I'm going to run that test to make sure it works. Great, no problems with that one. And the reason, just in case any of you didn't do this, the reason that I put in a WebDriver wait for that form processing is that I'm submitting something to the server. Anyway, so let's see what happens. In fact, let's see what happens if I take out these. It could be that I'm overcautious. It could be that these are not required. Okay, so the reason that I'm doing it is just in case there's additional processing time required. I got away with it, so I'm being overcautious, or I'm being cautious based on my experience, and it seems like a simple synchronization point to make sure that the correct page has happened. You may see a difference in your test because you may not have done that. I did that out of paranoia, I guess. We were also asked to submit the form with Radio 2 selected. What a splendid radio station that is. Let's have a quick look at the form here. Now by default, Radio 2 is not selected, so it should just be a matter of clicking on this submit button. Let's see what I did in my test. Right, let me just run this first and see if it works. Control-Shift F10 in IntelliJ. Great, that's the temporary file deletion nonsense. The test passed. So let me have a quick look at what I did for this. We go to the page, we know that we find the CSS selector input value RD2, that's this. So that's the input tag with the value RD2, that's radio button 2. So the only thing that I've done differently here that you may not have seen is, first of all, I check is the radio button 2 selected or not. If it is selected, then don't click on it. If it is not selected, then click on it because that's the state that we want. We find the submit button, as we did before. We click on the submit button, as before. We wait on the title change. Then I find the result in the resulting page and check the value. So this is an interesting concept. I take it for granted that I do this. I try and make my tests as robust as possible. That's why I've got an expected wait on the title when it may not be necessary, but was necessary at one point. Strictly speaking, I shouldn't have to do this. I should just come in, click on radio button 2. Strictly speaking, it's a radio button. It makes no difference if I click on it or not, whether it's selected. I have chosen to say if it's not selected, then select it. If it is, just leave it selected. Because my intent is to submit with that radio button selected, not that I have to select it, but that I submit with it selected. Other than that, there's nothing special in that test. So you were also asked to deal with the checkboxes. So this is submit form with only checkbox 1 selected. There's checkbox 1. So that means not checkbox 1 and 2 and 3, not checkbox 2 and 3 and 1, just checkbox 1. Now the difference between a checkbox and a radio box, of course, if I select a radio, only one can be selected. So here we have to select just checkbox 1. Let's see how I did that. Okay, I have done that in a multiple of ways. So let me run these tests and see if they actually work. Control-Shift F10. Okay, so both those tests worked. So I've done some abstraction in here. Let's have a look. So I have two tests. Submit form with only checkbox 1 selected. Find element exception. Now let's have a look at this page. I cancel, and we go back to the default. So we can see that by default, checkbox 3 is selected. Checkbox 1 is not selected. So what my test is doing is it is assuming that checkbox 1 is not selected and clicks it, and that checkbox 3, if checkbox 3 is selected, then click it. Then we click submit. Now there are some dangers here. I didn't check whether checkbox 1 was already selected, and I haven't done anything about checkbox 2. But clearly, this test handles the default conditions where checkbox 3 is selected, so we need to click it to get rid of it, and we need to click checkbox 1. Then you can see I have some abstractions. I've got a method called click submit button, and I have a method called assert checkbox results. Let me see what click submit button does. So in click submit button, that is all the code that we have been writing to find the submit button and click on it. And I have abstracted it into a method. Now this is what we do when we start using page object patterns, when we start dealing with layers of abstraction, when we try make our test more literate using domain-specific language features to make our test more readable. Now the next step for me would be to create a page object for this page. Refactor click submit button to be on a page, so something like page submit dot click submit button, but I have started by creating a local method. And here also we assert checkbox results. So in checkbox results, in the resulting page, I find the ID for the first checkbox and for the third checkbox. Now if these have not had a value coming through, then they won't be there. So the way I'm doing this is I'm expecting to find this element, so when I check does not equal null, then it should not equal null. That will be a true check. I'm expecting this because it's set to null. I try and find it. If it can't find it, it will still be null. If it does find it, then it's set, and this check will fail. Now again, you see I have missed out a check for checkbox 2. So if that somehow is set and there's a bug there, this test will not find it, because the intent of the test was to only submit the form with only checkbox 1 selected. So there could be a bit of work in this test to make it more robust. So now the second test is a little bit more robust. What this does is it says if checkbox 1 is not selected, then click it to make it selected. If checkbox 1 is selected, then click it to make it not selected. I could go further, I should go further and say if checkbox 2 is selected, then click it to make it not selected. And in the assert checkbox results, I should check for the status of checkbox 2. You may choose to do that as an optional exercise to make your tests more robust to fit the criteria in here where we submit the form with only checkbox 1 selected. Now we're also asked to submit the form with drop-down item 5 selected. Let me find that test. Drop-down 5 test. Great, I seem to have done this 4 different ways. Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this manually. So there's the drop-down. By default, it's drop-down 3. I want to select drop-down 5, which is not the last one. Then submit it. Then when it is done, I will see drop down as DD5, the value that was put through. So that seems fairly easy enough. Let's see what I did. I find the drop down. Let's have a quick look at the HTML here. So we've got a select for the drop down, and each of the options within that select is an option tag itself. So I can work at the option element level or the select level. So in the test, I get the drop-down select and I get the option that I'm looking for. So I do a find element on both of those. And in fact, you can see here for the drop-down select, I have chosen to essentially chain a find element. Now, I didn't have to do that. I could have done a find element from driver. This just makes it clear semantically that drop down, the option, is part of this select, rather than an option value DD5 in some other drop down somewhere else. So having found the drop down option, I'm clicking on the option. So that's essentially simulating this notion where we drop it down, then click on the option that we're looking for. Then we have the abstraction for click submit button. That's the same as it was before. And I've followed a similar pattern as before where I assert that the drop down value is correct. Now the way that I've done this and the reason that I've done this is that when I originally wrote these tests, I did not have these helper methods, so I had that code in each of these tests. So let me show you what it was like before we did this. If I inline this method, inline all invocations, thank you. You can see that each test now does not have that semantic value in there, and it has the code. So it's a little bit harder to read. It's a little bit less explanatory. It's not as semantic. There's now more WebDriver stuff in the test, and it's what we ultimately want is that our tests are semantic. They read telling us what the test is trying to do, what its intent is, and not what it's doing to make that happen. So I would have started with all that code in there, and then I would have just refactored out into method. In IntelliJ and Eclipse, you do refactor, and then refactor, and do an extract method. And that would move those lines of code out into a new method. So you can see, again, the assert code has moved out. This was common code in each one of those tests because essentially I want to check that in the expected result page, the drop-down 5 value has been set. So this first test is simply doing it with a chain of elements. It may not look like a chain, but it is. It's a find element. I could have quite easily done it off here as a find element and capture just drop down option itself. Now the next one I have done without going to the select. I've gone straight to the option. Now in some ways this is more dangerous because I'm not necessarily choosing option value DD5 within the specific drop down. If this appears in multiple drop downs, then I will simply pick the first one on the page. However, there is only one on the page, so this is less code to write. It's quite obvious what's going on. you get to choose. The reason I'm doing these tests in different ways is that you get to choose, and you have to make decisions when you do your automation about what you automate and what you don't and how best to do it. So let's have a look at the next one. Here I'm using the keyboard. So I'm getting the selection element itself, then I'm sending keys to that element. And the keys that I'm sending are drop down item 5. So I send those keys. Now, if I do not have this wait in, then it will not necessarily have selected by the time I hit the click button. I had to add this wait in here when I upgraded to Firefox 16 in order to make the test work. And all I'm doing in this test is waiting for the option that I want to be selected. And I'm using one of the expected conditions helpers to do that. I'm using the element to be selected in expected conditions, and a lot of the time the vast majority of things that you need to wait for will be covered by this expected conditions class. Even though they might be named slightly differently than you expect, they might not be intuitively named for you. They will be there. And if they're not, you write your own. And at the point that you need to write your own, we will have covered it, so you will know how to do it. And again, I simply click the button, then check the results. So here I'm using the keyboard, but I'm using the keyboard in a slightly different way. Here I am using send keys to send what is called a chord. And the chord is a sequence of keys. So the keys that I am sending are coming down at the drop down, doing a home, then down, 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 down to get to the 5. So I'm doing a home, down, 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 down. And then the click submit button, and we're off. So why haven't I added this synchronization in here? The reason I haven't is that I haven't needed it yet. This test failed without it. This test didn't. If this test fails without it, I will move this code down and add it in here. In fact, let me show you that. Let's assume that this test has failed. And I want to check whether putting in the wait statement actually makes a difference. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just copy that code in. Then I'll run this test and see if that actually makes a difference. If this test now passes, great. However, what I've done is I've copy and pasted code. We don't like copy and pasted code, so what we do is we refactor, extract method. I have to go, what on earth is this method doing? What are the semantics behind this method? And the semantics are wait for option 5 drop down selected. Now once I've got it in place, I might choose to rename that. I'm going to make it a private method because I don't want to reuse that anywhere else. Great, so that's refactored that here and here. So both my tests now have this more semantic approach to writing the actual test code. And this has moved down into its own method. So that's pretty much how we go about doing simple refactorings. I tend to create these methods when I need them. I probably don't go all out and create an abstraction layer immediately, because I will probably wait until I reuse it. On some projects, I'm pretty much guaranteed that I know that I'm going to be reusing this stuff, and I probably will think of how I'm going to create an abstraction layer before I actually create it, but a lot of the time I just refactor to an abstraction layer. And when I start using that page in more tests, and where those tests are in different classes, then I will move this type of code out from the test classes into an abstraction layer class like a page object or a workflow or some agent class or something else. And I will continually refactor so that I only have one instance of the code, so it's much more easy to maintain. Next up, you were asked to submit the form with multiple select, 1, 2, and 3. Let me show you what that meant. So here's multiple select. Let me default this 1, 2, and 3. We need to do them all. So in human land, I do control click, control click. That's what I need to do in human land when I'm selecting multiple values from this. And in the submit, when we select, I will see 3 things that I have to check the results of. And they are all called value multiple select, then 0, then 1, then 2. So let's see how I did that. So first of all, let's run the test and make sure they work. Control Shift F10. Great, so the test works. So hopefully what we've done is a good example. Now I've only done one instance of this, so let's have a look. I open the page, fine. Then I find the element multiple. So select with multiple equaling multiple, which is this top level value. This whole thing here. Now then, I'm doing a find elements to find all the option tags that are underneath that multi-select. Let's open up the HTML here. We can see that underneath select there are 4 options. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 4 is currently selected. And then we start to see some of the differences between WebDriver and the real world. In WebDriver, any one of these multi-selects, if I click it, it will select it or unselect it, which is different from the real world, because in the real world when I do a click on a multi-select, it will only ever select one of them and unselect the rest. So there's a nuance you have to be aware of. And if you do want to do this control click functionality, then you have to drop down into the user interactions that we're going to cover later on. So the reason we have to be aware of this is that I click 1, 2 and 3, and you can see that because it's a Java list, they start at 0 rather than 1. I also have to click on 3 to simulate, or click on 4 rather, number 4 in the list, click on that to unselect it, which I wouldn't normally have to do if I was clicking on a multi-select. Then we do the normal click submit button, which I've refactored out into a method, and then we go through to the next page and I assert that we have the multi-select 0 selected, we have 1, we have 2, and that there is no number 3. So that's basically doing, so the way I'm doing that is by a find elements on the multi-select 3 and checking that the return is empty. Because remember that when we do a find elements, it doesn't throw an exception. I could have done a find element, had an exception thrown, and caught it and used that as my determining factor. So there's, again, lots of different ways of exploring the same problem. Then for bonus points, submitting with a file and checking the name on output. I'm hoping some of you managed to do this. It's a bit of a sneaky one, but you know all the answers for it. Now what we're trying to simulate here is the file name here that has a browse, so we click on it and then we choose a file. Let me choose a file. That will do fine, don't know what it is. Submit, and you can see here in the output is the file name that we pass in. This is a sneaky one, so kudos to you if you figured this out, because in file name, now I can't type anything in there, but you saw that when I did type something or click on that, the dialog entered. Let me inspect what's going on here. So no doubt when you try to do it, you inspected it, and you can see that that button doesn't even exist, that browse button. That's rendered by Firefox because it's an input type file. It's a little bit sneaky, Now, you may have just gone on the forums and figured this out, done a web search. If you did, good for you, because that is how you're going to answer a lot of your questions when you start doing WebDriver and Selenium in the real world. You're going to go out there and see what other people have done. Hopefully you may have checked the documentation. If you did, good for you, because that's what you're going to have to do in the real world. Now, the way that we do this, let me get my test up. So I find the element. It's an input type with type file. We saw that when we inspected it. Then I have a sample text file in here, down in resources. So to do that, I have to get the resource that's associated with this class, and the get resource will get the correct path for this. Then I convert it into a URI, which will function fine for typing in. Then I just gave the answer away. In the file name input element, I send keys. That's all we have to do. We send the keys into the file box. Then the normal click submit button, wait. Then I'm looking for the file name in the output. So that was sneaky, and I hope it caused you to do a little bit of research to figure this stuff out. But it's fairly simple. And I really should show you my answer to question 7 running, so that you know that that is what we do in the real world. There. Easy. Well, hopefully. So that's it. That's all you have to do for a file input. It's the send keys that we use to send it through. So a quick summary of the manipulation, because there was quite a lot of work in there, and I hope you had to think a little bit through those exercises. So for manipulation, remember, for the file name fields we use send keys. Don't worry about those browse boxes, don't worry about the Windows dialogues. Send keys. Now a lot of people, they get nervous with this because they think, well, I'm not typing in the value, I'm not clicking on a file and selecting it. Remember, that's browser functionality. We have to not try and test the browser, we want to test our application. So checkbox and radio items, if it's check and see if it's selected first, interrogate it. If it isn't, then click on it. We can clear the text from a text field or from a text area. We cannot clear a checkbox, a multi-select, a drop-down or a radio button. If you want, feel free to build tests which try and do a clear on a checkbox and see what happens. See if you get an exception. When I'm trying to learn the API, that's exactly what I do. I build tests to check the different parts of the API. In fact, I may have some tests that I will show you in just a second to demonstrate that. Remember that simple manipulation, the kind of stuff we did there, has a very simple set of methods. You saw it was click, send keys, submit, clear. And we can do a lot of things with it. Doesn't always map onto the real world, so be careful with that. But make sure that the intent of your test is what you're modeling. So make sure you clear things and check them. And make sure you model your preconditions. And remember, you also saw refactoring to remove repeated classes out, remove repeated code. That's an important habit to get into. And a little bit more on send keys, because you saw send keys in there in my example answers. We use keys.chord to send key sequences. Shift, Control, start a modifier sequence. And we use a null, keys.null, to end a modifier sequence. So if you look at this example here, I'm doing a send keys with a keys chord. I do a keys shift, and then type bob, and then a keys null, and then I send in a string. So what that will actually send in is bob in uppercase, followed by a space, followed by capital D, and obs, to type in Bob Dobbs. Send keys is a very useful thing to investigate. Just remember, we can send in a bunch of strings, we can send in things from the keys class, the accessible keys class, and we start modifying sequences. And when we create a modifier sequence, Shift, Control, Alt, then we need to use null to end it. So I said I was going to show an example of the kind of what ifs, because that is how I work, that is how I learn the API. So here is a what if class from the IDE, and this is a what happens if on the manipulate section. So I have gone, I wonder if I can clear a checkbox. So I have found the checkbox on this page, drive it up, find element, find that checkbox, clear it, see what happens. Now I catch the WebDriver exception that is thrown, and then immediately after the clear I've got a fail because I was expecting an exception. Now if I run this, as I do against different browsers, if at any point in time I suddenly can clear a checkbox, then this test will fail and I will know about it, and I will know that there's a change in the API and a change in the functionality. When I'm learning Java, I create unit tests for the new libraries that I'm learning so that I can have a form of documentation that makes sense to me and shows me the degree of learning that I've got. A lot of what we're doing here is I'm encouraging you to write tests which help you understand the scope of the WebDriver API. I encourage you to go beyond the exercises we're doing, and every question that you have, don't go on a forum and ask the question. Do it for yourself. Go, can I do that? Try it. And you will see through experimentation. So in the last video I mentioned I was going to show you a secret. I was going to show you how to use the evaluate function in IntelliJ. What is the evaluate function? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to do it on the comments test. So I'm going to do this one. I'm going to use this test, submit form with my comments, and I am going to put a breakpoint just before we click the submit button. So I'm going to run this test now in debug mode. And now we have a test in mid-flight. Let's bring this down a little bit so you can see. And let me move the IDE over here a bit so we can see the browser at the same time. Now normally in debug mode we start stepping through. This will go on to the next one, this will do the click. Or we can step through into the methods and see what code is going on. But we can also, I have here a comment text area and a send keys. So I'm just going to highlight that and say evaluate expression, the Alt F8. And what this will do, so now I have a magic dialog. This is a magic dialog which will let me type in code into the running application. So for comment area, send keys, I'm going to send in hello, make that a proper Java statement, and say evaluate. So it has done that, it has sent in hello into here. So remember we saw the keys. Keys.chord, I'm going to create a new chord sequence here. And I'm going to make a modifier. I'm going to do keys dot, let's do a shift. Then send in a lowercase hello. Then remember we have to send in a keys dot null. So it has passed in hello in uppercase. What happens if I do a shift modifier like Alt and evaluate that? Whoa! So this is how we can experiment with the API. This is how you can experiment with most of the things in Java. You can write your own tests and that's a very useful way to do it. But sometimes stick your test in debug mode and then just evaluate the expressions. You can run any Java in here with any of the variables that you've got currently running on the stack at that point. I could send keys. In fact, I'm not sure what will happen now if I try and send keys in with those dialogues open. Probably nothing. Yep, so they've got away because the sequence is being passed. But it's just an example of another way of experimenting and learning with the API. I tend to write tests most of the time, but if I'm debugging, if I'm uncertain but I'm pretty sure why this test not working, I may well breakpoint at a certain point and then start sending commands in to get things working in context. Try out different parameters, try out different values. It's an important thing to know. Now I'm just going to show you a new class, another support class. This is a select support class. And the way that you use this is you instantiate a new select object, passing in a web element, usually the web element of the select you want to work with. And then you have a new bunch of helper methods to work with. You can say, is this select, is it multiple? Get the options from it. You saw previously that I had to do a find elements and use a CSS for the option tag. Get options will return a list of web elements that matches the options. You can get all the selected ones. You can get the first one, deselect them all. Gives you a bunch of helper methods to work with. Let me quickly show you this in the code. I'm going to try and not give away the answer to the next exercise for you. So you can see here, I've created a variable called multiple select. I've instantiated a new select object on the multiple select element that I get by doing a find element. And then once I have that, I then have access to a new bunch of methods to help me work with selects. So I'm going to suggest you at least start with that, have a look at what the API offers, and try and repeat the previous select 1, 2, and 3, the multi-select exercise, using the select class. And I will show you my answer in just a second. And the reason I'm getting you to do this without fully explaining it is I want you to get used to trying things out. I want you to get used to doing Control Q and looking at the Java doc. I want you to get used to looking at the documentation for these methods. So you're not relying on me and my videos. You're relying on the actual information that's out there. Give it a shot. Come back here in, say, 10 minutes once you've done the next exercise, and I will show you my answer. So let's see the select support class in action. So what I have done is I have repeated the exercise to select 1, 2, and 3 on the multiple selection. Remember, task was to select 1, 2, and 3 and submit. I have now redone that using the select support class. So to do that, I have to instantiate a new select on the element that represents the select option. I'm asserting that it is multiple select using the interrogation method because it's supposed to be, and this suggests it really should be. So I'm just checking, here I'm really just checking the semantics around this select support class. Then I want to get all the selected options, because remember, one of the things we had to do was make sure that we're only selecting 1, 2, and 3. So I am getting a list of web elements for all the selected options. Then I'm checking that there is only one thing in there. There's only supposed to be one thing in there, which is item number 4. Then I am getting the first item in that selected list and checking the text, and the text says selection item 4, which is what it's supposed to be. Then I'm using the select helper class to deselect all. I'm not creating a loop to run through this anymore, I'm just doing deselect all. Then I'm saying get all selected options, just to double check that nothing is returned and there's nothing selected. Then I can start selecting the things in the list. And you can see here I've done it in 3 different ways. So I've done a select by visible text for selection item 1. I've selected by index 1, which will select the second because remember it's 0 indexed in Java. And then I've done a select by value to get number 3. Then, just to double check what I've done, I'm saying get me all the selected options. And there should be 3 of them. Then I simply submit and check the results as I did before. So the select is a helper to make it a little bit easier to work with the selects in HTML. I hope that was an interesting experiment for you, but you need to do more experiments to learn the API. And that was my approach for doing it. Now it's time to look at the user interactions. You've already seen that some of the Selenium commands that we use, some of the WebDriver commands, don't do exactly the same thing as what happens in the real world. When I'm clicking on the multi-drop-downs, the multi-select values, we're doing a control click every time we hit one, which is not what happens in the real world when we do a click. Now, when we encounter those situations where the basic WebDriver commands don't fully cover the real world, that's when we turn to user interactions, because they may more accurately simulate user interaction. Now, user interactions are great for the draggable stuff, drag and drop things around, for mouse interaction. I have found them to be less good for standard form manipulation, standard clicking on checkboxes, things like that. You just don't want to do that kind of stuff using interactions because you've already got that in the normal WebDriver classes. So I'm going to show you user interactions, but I'm trying to temper this entire section with a warning that user interactions are more complicated. Use them in as minimal a form as possible if you want to make your test robust. User interactions change between browser versions. They change between driver versions. Your tests may not act the same cross-browser when you're using user interactions. Try and keep this stuff as constrained and tight as possible. But it's still really important to learn about user interactions and what they do, because sometimes they are absolutely necessary. Now, the way that we use user interactions, and I will show you in code as normal, we create a new actions object, which takes a driver in its constructor. We then subsequently use methods on that actions to build an action sequence. So I can say new actions driver, key down control, dot send keys, space, dot key up, control, dot perform, and it will perform that control space action. So we build a sequence of actions and then we perform them. We have actions that are related to keyboard, key down, key up, send keys, and the key down and key up relate to modifier keys, Shift, Control, Alt. They don't work on things like space, GH, whatever the normal keys. A send keys with keys.null does pretty much the same as a key up command. Then all the rest of the commands here are related to the mouse. Click and hold, clicks the left button and holds it. Release, releases that left button. Click, clicks the button, double click, move to element, move by offset. All these things are mouse actions. And here I'm saying that it may more accurately simulate user interaction. That's not guaranteed. Sometimes it doesn't work the way you want, and I've got an example just coming up that's going to show this. Now, if you want to create an action sequence and use it later, that's when you use the build command, because build will create that action sequence ready for you to do a perform later on. If you just want to use it straight away, just do a perform, because a perform will also do a build before it does the perform statement. So, a cautionary example. Because I said that the multi-select options is an example where the WebDriver works differently from the real world. The example test that I was going to use for this was around the multi-select options. So I created an action pretty much just like this that comes in and clicks on the top one, then the next one, then the next one down, then does the perform, and then clicks the submit button. And that sequence of actions would result in a proper click being sent to the first one in the list, then the second, then the third one, resulting in only the third one being selected. Now this was working fine in Firefox 15 with the previous driver. It doesn't work now with Firefox 16 with the current version of Selenium that I'm using, 2.25. It may work in future ones, but the point is, I had trouble getting it working in the first place. It doesn't work now. It may work in the future. It doesn't work on Chrome now, but it used to. All of these things make the justification for using user interactions in this particular example really hard, because I don't have to use user interactions to get to the point where only one thing in a multi-select is clicked. I can do that either using the select helper class and doing a deselect all, then selecting the one that I want, or looping through based on a find elements and unselect them if they're selected, then select the ones that I want. I don't have to use this user interactions because there's no need for me to simulate accurately the user interactions. There's no JavaScript on top of this. And even if there was, I may not have to use user interactions to test that JavaScript, because remember, we can trigger JavaScript events in other ways. So we always have multiple ways of approaching it, and sometimes the best thing to do is not automate it the exact same way that the user does. So I'm putting this forward as a cautionary example. The code is in the main code base. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it will come back in the build, sometimes it won't. So let's look at a proper example. I'm going to do a quick demo of user interactions for you. And let's do a quick walkthrough of some usage of new actions. So here's the basic HTML form that you've seen before. What I'm going to do, so remember we do new actions for the driver. Now what's happening here is that I now have an actions object, and you can see all the methods for it, and a lot of these methods return an actions object. It's the same actions object that I'm working on. It returns self, it returns this. That means we can use it to chain these methods to build our commands. So if I want to do new actions driver and I want to click on this checkbox, I can go click on a web element and get driver dot find element. Let's do by CSS selector. And the element is, let's click on checkbox 1. So that is going to be an input with the value CB1. So let's do input with the value equal to CB1. Then, in order to perform this action, I do a perform. So let's run this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this in debug mode and we'll see it running. Be easier than writing a full test for what we're trying to do here. Because what I'm trying to do is just give you a flavor for seeing new actions, seeing how we chain the commands, having a quick feel for how we use them, and we'll have a quick drop down into the code. So there's our browser. Let me move this over because the test is ready to click. So if I step over this action, we see that it has clicked on checkbox 1. Great. Now we have other ways of doing that. I could just find the element and I could click on it. But this is using a native event to do it. it's an important distinction at this point to understand that when we create drivers, I have the option of saying enable native events or not. When set native events is true, I am using actual clicks, actual mouse clicks to do this. If I set it to false, then I am simulating the native events through JavaScript event triggering. You get a slightly different effect. If you look on the WebDriver website, it shows the different browser combinations and what is currently supported by native events and what is not. Generally, I'll set native events on, unless I get some sort of problem, in which case for that particular test, I will switch them off and try and do something else. So in our test, I basically just did that as a direct action with a perform. I don't have to. Over here, I could do a build on the end. I'm going to make this actions click on CB1. Alright, so if I bring in action, well, which one do we want? We want Selenium Interactions action. So what I've done here this time is I have created an action sequence, I have built it, and I am saving it for later in this click on CB1. So I can do click on CB1.perform. I can do another click on CB1.perform and another CB1.perform. So let's have a quick look at that. So let me bring this over again so we can see it. I'm going to step over this building, just like the Hulk can leap over tall buildings. So now I'm going to perform this checkbox. I'm going to perform it again, and one last time it should set the checkbox again. So you can see there, because we have built the action, I can store it and perform it whenever I want, as long as the DOM is still pretty much the same, as long as the page is still pretty much the same. Now if I really want to, I don't have to build it at this part. However, what I've then got is not an action, it's a sequence of actions that has been returned that I could subsequently build on if I want to. Now let's have a quick look into action. I'm not sure how much value this will add to you. So if I jump into this method for click, we can see here that actions, when it is constructed, it's constructed with the driver, and the driver has the keyboard and the mouse that are used when we do these actions. So these are coming directly from the driver that's in use. So the class then simply calls the methods in that driver. So you can see that we have, let's look at the public methods, key down, just calls the key down. We can, when we do a key down on an element, we're chaining this action onto the action list, and it's acting pretty much as you'd expect this to do. But what's important to remember is that all of these methods have Javadoc, so I can control Q on them and see the code. So get in the habit of doing that when you use it. So now it's exercise time. Your job is to go off to selenium/GUI_user_interactions.html, and there you will see this page. Now we have some draggable things. We've got a little paint thing, a list of events. This will respond to some keys. So your job is to move draggable 1 onto droppable 1. This is draggable 1 onto droppable 1. There you go. there's the assert that you're going to use. Your job is to drag draggable 2 onto droppable 1. And there it says, get off me. Very different message. Your job is to trigger a control B and make sure you get this text change going on. The challenges, when I do control space over here, you can see that the red squares are saying let go. When I do let go, it goes back to drop here. Your challenge is to try and simulate that condition and assert that let go appears in the red square. See how you get on? This is quite a hard one. Give it your best shot. Now a slightly easier challenge is, can you draw something in the canvas? The way I'm drawing is I'm clicking and moving around, and then I can draw in the canvas. And again, things will appear in the event list to tell you that that's happened. So give it your best shot. Try and do all of this using the user interactions. I would give it the first 15 to 20 minutes. The draw challenge probably about 10 minutes. Time limit your control space challenge to 10 minutes and don't go beyond that, because that is quite a hard one. So then when we come back, we'll see how you get on. So that's you finished with the user interactions exercises. Well done. Let me have a quick look at my code. So some of this is quite simple. I think the draggable 1 to droppable 1. All we do is find the elements. Find the element for draggable 1, find the element for droppable 1. Then create a new actions where the action is to click and hold. Then move to element. Then release. Then perform that. Then assert on droppable 1, get text. I hope that's what you did. I hope that worked for you. Now, drag and dropping number 2 onto droppable 1 is much the same, but I have chosen to use a different mechanism for doing it. So again, I find the elements, but this time I do a drag and drop command, because that's what this was designed for. So I can simulate it with a click and hold and a move and a release, or I can issue a drag and drop followed by a release. That will do the same thing. Now the control in space. How did you get on with control in space? This was a red herring. This is very hard. That's why I've told you to time box this for 10 minutes. You'll have experimented with a bunch of things, as I did when I was trying to get this to work. And I couldn't get this to work, and the reason I could not get this to work was that key down only works for the shift keys. Shift, Control, Alt. We can't do a key down on a space. So when I do a key down, I do a send keys. A send keys does a key down followed by a key up. So I can see it happening. I can see the message change, but I can't assert on it. And the simple answer is I have not been able to do this. I have tried with the AWT robot, but whilst the robot sends the keys, they do not actually go into the browser, so I haven't been able to set the focus onto the browser to get it work. I could drop down to lower level libraries, wrapping around auto or various other things, but again it's one of those questions of why bother? Why would you do that level of testing? If it doesn't work easily sometimes, just don't do it in automation. It's not the kind of thing we need to automate all the time. It's the kind of thing that we want to test at a JavaScript level, so get the JavaScript unit test, making sure that the function works, that the DOM gets changed, that you can trigger it through that. But if it's just a case of has this function be mapped to this event through JavaScript, then some things we just have to test in a different way. So you were also asked to check for Control B, and Control B does work. It's an unfortunate key press because it brings up the bookmarks in Firefox, but it does work. Drawing something on the canvas, again that's not too hard once you figure it out, because the drawing clearly has multiple methods we could use, and we have to use a click and hold rather than a click. Remember, a click does a click, and a click is down up. What we want is a click and hold, a move, because the way that this Canvas Paint has been implemented is you have to move the mouse in order to have something happen, and then release. Now if you want, as an extended challenge, one that I haven't shown an example for here, why not try and actually draw something, like a picture on the canvas instead of a few dots, because all I've drawn are a few dots. So let me run these tests just so you see that they're working. Now one of the things with user interaction tests is that I don't touch anything. I don't touch anything when I'm running these, because I could move the mouse at the wrong time just as the user interactions is trying to do it. Which is why you run these tests on other machines, or you run them in other displays if you're on Linux or something like that. So we will move, first of all we will click and move, there we go, then we'll do a drop on it, Control B, and hopefully you saw us drawing on the canvas there as well. You can slow down the video and see it, but that was it. There's when you will know when you have to use user interactions, because nothing else will work. There will be no other plain way of doing it. You will have tried to trigger JavaScript directly, you will have called JavaScript functions, there's just no other way of doing it. That's when you drop down to user interactions. And I have had to use them on production systems, but I'd much prefer when we don't have to, when we develop the application such that that type of testing is not necessary. Because I feel it's just getting ever more brittle in our code base. But it is there when you need it. And the really good thing about user interactions is that they're cross-platform and they're cross-browser, so they will help out. I just want to provide a quick update on the user interactions, because some code has changed since I recorded the initial exercises, and essentially the reset page. I put all the changes in the reset page here. So you can see that originally my reset page method just had driver.navigate.refresh. That was fine. When I started doing this on multiple browsers, I had to add additional synchronization in to actually wait for the various elements on the page. So wait for the canvas element and wait for the key event list. That was mainly for Opera. Subsequently, over some updates for Firefox, the control key processing became a little bit intermittent. Kent Wood did some investigation on this, one of the people taking the course, and he put forward the workaround that before doing any of the interactions, what we need to do is click on the actual HTML to bring the page into focus. By doing this, by adding this single line into the @before method, which runs before every test, means that we bring the page into focus so that all our user interactions actually take place on that page, so the events are triggered. That single change makes the test much more reliable in Firefox. So if you are having any issues with user interaction, add in the click on the HTML and see how that goes. Now let's look at alerts. Alerts are really simple. The API around alerts is really simple. Dealing with them is very simple. But apparently there's a lot of questions and queries come through on the Selenium forum about alerts. And most of the reason for that is because alerts don't appear in modern web applications very much. We tend not to use them anymore. It's pretty old hat. It's pretty annoying to see alerts come up. And what a lot of testers are experiencing are not alerts. They're divs, they're modal divs, they're different ways of using the DOM to achieve a dialogue type effect. That's not what the Alert API is for. The Alert API is to handle the things that are triggered by JavaScript alert code. Code like this. In JavaScript, an alert will show an alert. A confirm will show a confirm alert. A prompt will show a prompt with the actual text in there. That's what the Alerts API is designed to handle. Now we do it by doing a driver.switch_to.alert. We're switching the context from the main window now to an alert. Once we've done that, when we're in the alert, we can then get the text of the alert. We can dismiss it or accept it. Or we can send keys to it when it's one of the prompt alerts. It's pretty much that simple. So let me show you a quick example of it in context. So here is a very, very simple example. I've gone off to compendiumdev.co.uk/selenium/alert.html. I find the alert examples ID, which is the alert button, and then I click on it. Then I get that message, I am an alert box. So I'm going to assert that driver.switch2alert and get the text for that alert box that is up there, that I get back the message that I'm looking for. Then I would accept that alert box to get rid of it. Let me show you this test running. There you go, that was easy. Now, when you do the exercises, you're going to be using a page with more alerts on it than that one. That's my secret alert page so that I don't give the entire game away. But I will give the game away in the next video where we explain the exercises that you use this API, driver.switch2alert, which returns an alert object with the methods on it for getting the text, dismissing, accepting, or sending keys. Very simple API, and you will be using that in the next exercise. Now it's time for you to do the alert exercises. I don't believe that this will take you very long. I think this is a 10 to 15, possibly 20-minute exercise. Now you're going to use compendiumdev.co.uk/selenium/alerts.html, which is this page. You can see we have a button that says show alert box, that shows an alert box that says I am an alert box, a confirm box that shows I am a confirm alert, and when we click on it, this value here changes. Show a prompt box, where the challenge is to change me, so I change it, and again this changes down here. So we have the ability to assert on the results of using the alert boxes. So for each of the alerts, assert using get text to make sure you have the correct one, accept and dismiss the alert, so create a test for both, accept and dismiss the confirm and check the text, accept and dismiss the prompt and check the text, then change the text on the prompt and accept and dismiss. So just use those different alert dialogues in different ways, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. I don't think this will take you very long. I don't think this will challenge you very much now. I hope that wasn't too hard. Let's have a look at the answers that I came up with. I suspect they're very, very similar to what you did. So this will be a very quick run through of the code behind this. Now this is going to beep, beep, beep. We were tasked with the basic alert handling. So the basic alert handling I did was find the button that's going to trigger the alert, click on it, know what message I'm expecting, which is I'm an alert box, then check that the alert that appears, the text in it, is what we're expecting, then accept that alert to get rid of it. Same for the next one, for dismissing it. I do the same thing. I click on the button to make the alert box show, I check the message, then I dismiss it. Now for the confirm handling, on the confirm example, this will change the text on the page. So I have to find both the button and the result. Then I'm checking the start value for the result. Then I click on the alert. I confirm it through the accept and check that the result that came back was true, which is different from what we started with. For the same alert dialog, the confirm one, I'm going to dismiss this one. Again, I check for the button, I check for the result, I click on the button, I check that the text in the alert is what I'm expecting, Then I dismiss it and check that the return value is false. Therefore I know that I have actually dismissed that alert. The prompt for accept and dismiss is much the same. Again, we find the button and the result. Click on the button, check that the alert message is what we're expecting, then accept it and check that the message that comes back is what we're expecting. It starts off as pret on the page by default, then turns into change me. To dismiss, then it starts off with pret. We check we get the right prompt up. When I dismiss it, I'm left with pret because no change has happened. Then the other thing that we can do with the prompt, of course, is that we can change the text. So we do this with a send keys on the alert. So again, I find the button and the result, I check the dialog is with the one that we're expecting. Then when the alert is up, I send the keys into it, then I accept, and the message that appears on the page is the one that I typed in. Now I do the same thing, where I change the text, but I dismiss the dialog, and I'm left with pret. Now I don't know if you experimented or not with the dialogues, but one of the questions I had with alerts was, what happens if I send text to an alert that is not expecting it? And the answer is that Firefox will throw an element not visible exception, and Chrome will quite happily send the text, but nothing will appear in the alert as a result of sending the text. So this is not a big browser difference, a big driver difference, but there is again there are differences in the way that these drivers deal with the world. So just be aware of that in your tests. Now it's time to have a look at cookies. Cookies are the glue that hold the web together and allow various vendors to spy on us. So it's very important we learn a little bit about cookies. Now the Cookies API in WebDriver is very, very simple. So on manage, do driver.manage.getCookies, and that will return a list of all the cookies. We can get specific cookies, get cookie named, and then the name of the cookie. And we can interact with these cookies and change them. So we can driver.manage.addCookie, and then there's a specific cookie object that we can create and add. We can delete all the cookies, or delete a specific cookie, or delete a specifically named cookie. Now you typically delete a cookie that you have taken from getCookies or getCookieNamed. Now you notice there's no amend cookie, because what you do is you delete it and then add it. The browser doesn't know. The browser doesn't care about amendment. The browser basically is a storage point for all these cookies. You add them, they are there when it accesses them. It's pretty much as simple as that. So let me show you a quick example test, and again I'll show you the example test in this annotated form, then we will drop down to the code and have a look at it. So in this particular cookies example, I have created a search page, selenium/search.php, that uses cookies in order to track what you've searched for and how many times you have searched. So the first thing we do in this particular test is delete all the cookies, because I want a nice clean test. Then I will navigate and refresh the page. Then when I do a driver.manage.getCookieNamed and then this specific cookie, nothing will be there because we deleted all the cookies. So you can see that when I ask for a cookie with a specific name and it's not there, I don't get an exception, I just get a null returned. So let's have a quick look in the actual code to learn a little bit more about cookies before we let you loose on the examples. Because this is it's a very simple API. It's all under manage. It's all at the root level. All the methods have got cookie in it, so they're pretty obvious. Let me show you the code. And let's have a look at the code. I've just run the test, so you can see everything is passed. I didn't think you needed to see this one running, because there's really nothing to see. Right, it opens a page, it deletes the cookies, it checks there's no cookies. That's pretty much it. There's really nothing to see when you do that. However, what we will do is we will go into Firefox and use Firebug and have a look at the cookies. So what you've seen is driver.manage. Then we've got all the cookie methods: the add cookie, delete cookie named, delete all cookies, get cookie named, get cookies. So what on earth is a cookie? Well, here's one. Cookie. This is returning, but cookie here is a null. So let's assume for a minute that cookie isn't. What have we got with a cookie? Cookie has a domain, the domain that was created for, the expiry, a name, that's what we use in the get cookie named part, this name, the path, which is important for the application when it's trying to get these things back, the value, the actual value that's in the cookie, because cookie is really a name value pair with various controls on who can access it and when it expires. Then it's got the security on it, and that's pretty much it. And you can see there's a builder. So there's an alternative way of creating a cookie class through the use of a cookie builder. So to create a cookie, I can either do, let's see, cookie a new cookie equals new cookie, and then I have to put the various values in the constructor. So I've got a whole bunch of different options. You can create just a name value pair, put the path in, add the domain, add the expiry, and add the security. Typically the best one if you want your applications to be robust is going to be the full one with the is secure. However, a lot of the time when I'm doing automation, I'm typically just amending cookies. So I'm getting one that's there, then I'll delete it, then I will change the one, then I will add it back in. A lot of the time I'm fudging things to get them into the right position rather than creating cookies from scratch. And I always want to try and use the cookies in the same format that the application themselves creates. Because it's very important to me that there's nothing odd that the automation is doing, otherwise I'm introducing the potential for false positives. I'm introducing the potential for tests not to work, automation not to work, when there's actually nothing wrong with the application. So let me have a quick look at this page in Firefox. So there we go. There's the page. There's the mandatory warning in the UK saying we use cookies, if you're not happy, leave now. Now in Firebug, it has this handy cookies section. So you can see that I have some cookies. What this one is, I have no idea. I did not create that one, I don't think. Okay. So I have, these are the important ones. So you can see here, Selenium simplified number of visits, 3. I've been here 2 times before. The current cookie says this is your 3rd visit. Selenium simplified last search. Last time I was here, I searched for Selenium RC. That's how it knows. You were here on this time. That's the last visit time. And you search for RC. So what happens if I remove all the cookies and then refresh this page? Then it tells me this is your first search and then creates some of the cookies. So by using Firebug and the cookies functionality, I can get a feel for how this page interacts with cookies, and then I will know how to automate it, because you can see that by default of refreshing the page it's created 2 cookies. It hasn't yet identified what my last search was because I haven't done one yet. So if I do that now, we should see a new cookie, Selenium simplified last search. So if I wanted to check whether this page was functioning correctly with its cookies, that's the order that I would look for these cookies and create these cookies. And when I create the cookie, you can see there's no security on it. There's the path and there's the domain. That's what I'm going to want to put in the cookie. And the easiest way for me to create a cookie for any page is just to get one, then amend it, then add it back in with a different name. Then I'll get the correct path, I'll have the expiry, security codes, various other things. The cookie builder is just a convenience, an easier way of creating a cookie. In fact, it's not even an easier way, it's just another way of creating a cookie. You can do new cookie, and then you saw the polymorphism associated with all the different constructors that were in there. Or you can use a cookie builder. The cookie builder is a builder class that is statically contained within the cookie class itself, so you have to do new cookie.builder to get the builder. The cookie builder constructor takes the name and the value, because essentially that's the minimum thing for a cookie, name value pair. Then, once you have the builder, you can add a domain, add a path, add expires on, add is secure. And then when you're ready, call .build to create a cookie from that builder. The builder pattern is quite useful in terms of allowing you to build something halfway, then amend it, reuse it, rebuild, or to make your code more literate, more readable. Rather than having to guess what all the different values are in the constructor, you've got specific methods which are adding them in through a builder. And it's pretty much your choice which one you use, so just get used to using both, and hopefully within your tests you will make the most appropriate choice for the readability and maintainability of your test. We can create cookies through the constructor, or use the cookie builder. So if I do cookie, I'm going to say another new cookie equals, then I have to do new cookie builder. Now that won't do anything, and that should not be there. So the builder itself takes some parameters. So the constructor for the builder is the name value pair. So I'm going to create a new cookie called my cookie with the value my value. This is returning a cookie builder. I don't want a cookie builder, I want a cookie. So with any builder, we have to make the command that actually builds it. So by doing new cookie builder .build, now there's not a lot of advantages on top of doing that instead of just new cookie, because there was a constructor that let you do that. However, with the cookie builder, I could save the builder, and then I've got a head start when I'm creating more cookies. So I could do this. Let's make it easier to find. Why did I have to do that? Because this is where the builder exists. Let's have a look. You can see here that the builder is within the cookie class, and it's a static within the cookie class. So cookie.builder, another new cookie builder. Then here, if I want to, that new cookie dot, then we've got all the builder values. So I can say is secure, yes it is. I can build this up over time until I'm ready to use it, and then another new cookie dot build. And now it's your turn to shine again. So using the page that you just saw, the search engine, http compendiumdev.co.uk/selenium/search.php, you're going to use the cookies that page uses. You can see the list there, there's 3 cookies that are mainly used on that page. And you're going to write a test to search and then check that the number of visits is 1. So you're essentially going to make it your first search. And it's going to be a repeatable test so that every time it runs, it's always going to be the first search. Then we're going to do some hacking about in the page. So I want you to set the number of cookie visits to 42 and check that when you do another search that the cookie goes up to 43. I want you to do this by cloning a cookie, which means taking one that already exists, amending it and putting it back, and creating a cookie from scratch. And also remember to experiment with the cookie builder. as well as just using the constructor. So that probably means about 4 tests, and you decide where to put the cookie builder when you're doing that. And when you come back, we'll have a look at my answers. You've seen all the information you need in order to do this. It's just a matter of you putting it together. Remember, if you get stuck, we're going to look at the answers in just a minute. I think this will take you about 10 to 15 minutes to do. And welcome back. Now what we're going to do is, I'm just going to run the tests. You can see them passing. So you can see that I have an @before method, which will run before any test is run. And what it does, it gets me to the search page. And I'm going to delete all cookies. Every time I start one of these tests, I'm going to delete all the cookies so that everything is fresh and ready for me to work. And you can see here I have a method called refresh page objects. And all that is doing is making sure that these fields at the top, the query input and the submit button, have the associated web element on them. Given that I've just deleted all cookies, I've gone to the page, I'm making sure that I do not have any stale web elements. So I'm just finding the element again. I have these tests. Now I have a very simple test here. Do a search and check for cookies. And this is the one that is associated with make sure it is my first visit test. So what it does is it comes in, we have no cookies. I clear the input, I send the keys to do a search for cookie test, and I click. That will then create the cookies. So then I go and get those cookies, which gives me a set of cookies. Each cookie is only present once in a set. And I iterate through that set of cookies, and for each cookie I check, is it the number of visits cookie? As soon as we find it, I then check the value of that cookie. So I go aCookie.getValue, and I check that it equals the value 1. And you can see here that because getValue comes back as a string, I convert this integer 1 into a string using the string.valueOf function. So here I am getting the cookie directly rather than iterating through on the getCookies list. So I'm using a getCookieNamed function here. So we do the same thing. We've gone to the page, we've refreshed, there's no cookies there, remember. I send keys to do a cookie test, I click, then I go directly to that cookie and I check the value. And this time, instead of taking the cookie value and using it as a string, I am turning it into an integer before I check. So I'm doing an integer.parseInt and then getting the value. What I try to do in these tests is show you different ways of doing it. So that if you're at a beginner's level of Java, you're getting to see different ways of doing this type of work. So those of you that are more experienced in Java and are looking at my Java coding style and thinking, this man is all over the shop. The reason is I'm trying to demonstrate more things in each test. So now let's have a look at changing the cookie visits count. We have an empty set of cookies. I do a search for cookie test. That will create some of the cookies that I want. Then I get the cookie named number of visits. So I have this in a cookie method. I check that it is the first visit. Then what I do is I clone the cookie. So to clone the cookie, I'm basically saying create a new cookie and use the existing cookie's name, the domain, the path, the get expiry that is secure. So these are all the values that are associated with the existing cookie, but I am adding the value that I want, which is 42 for the actual value of that cookie. Then I delete the existing cookie. So here I'm using delete cookie a cookie. I'm not using the named delete, I'm using delete specific cookie. Then I'm adding the cookie that we created. Then, having set it up I clear the input, send in another search, click, click, then check that the number of visits cookie now tells me it is 43. Then I've repeated the test using the cookie builder. So everything is much the same. However, when I create the cloned cookie, instead of doing new cookie, I'm using the cookie builder. So I'm saying new cookie builder, where the cookie name is the old cookie and the value is this new value that I'm setting it to, 29. And the reason I'm doing 29 instead of 42 from the test is I want to make sure that these are working. So I'm doing different values and it's not just picking up the same values that there was previously. Then, because I'm using the builder, I'm explicitly stating set the domain, set the path, set expires on, set is secure. And I'm using the values from the existing cookie that we took out of the cookie jar that was being managed by the browser. Then again, I delete the cookie, add in our new cookie as a replacement, then do another search. This is being a bit more brutal. This is the one where we construct the cookie from scratch rather than cloning it. So let me just change the formatting of this so you can see it. So what this is doing is it's coming in, doing the search, then I'm deleting the existing cookie and I'm creating a new cookie from scratch using the same name, giving it a value of 402, and I'm adding the path. So I have analyzed the functionality of the application, and the things that are important are, for this application, the name, the value, and the path. I don't need to set everything else, so it's a little bit smaller than when I clone the cookie. But this requires analysis. This requires you to work with the application that you're dealing with and put in the values that it specifically needs. Some browsers don't need path. I think I added path when I started doing cross-browser testing in Chrome. I think with Firefox it worked without path. When I put it into Chrome, it needed the path in order to work effectively. So it's going to vary on browser to browser what your minimum level of functionality is. You don't have that problem when you clone the cookie because you're getting exactly what the browser itself has put in. So there was no cross-browser issues there. It was only when I started doing it by scratch. And then you can see I do the same thing. I do another search and then check the value of the cookie. So that was pretty simple. I hope you did something very similar. Okay, so JavaScript. We use JavaScript, or I use JavaScript a lot for workarounds. If there's anything that I'm finding that I can't get WebDriver to do natively, chances are I'll drop down to JavaScript to deal with something specific. I use it for custom synchronization. I'll create expected conditions which are using JavaScript, or I may use JavaScript directly to do the synchronization with the execute async. I can make the application itself more testable for me because I can write JavaScript code that will change the application before I start testing it. Now you can argue that's not necessarily the best thing to do, but hey, that's what I'll do. I will make hidden fields available to me. I will amend values. I will do whatever it takes to test the application, and JavaScript is one way that I have for doing that. So I can use it to simulate hard to reach conditions by putting the application into a certain state, by calling the JavaScript functionality that makes up the application itself, by injecting new JavaScript into the application and using that. With the various hooks that Flash comes with, it can expose variables to JavaScript, so we can use it to help us test Flash, and we can use it for the HTML5 for dealing with the canvas and various other things if we need to. So JavaScript is another language that we have to start learning. So we've already got CSS selectors, so we're learning HTML fully with the CSS selectors. If you're using XPath, you've got XPath as a language, Java, which is the language we're programming in, and now JavaScript. It is very useful to have some JavaScript in your tool belt. Now you don't often need much JavaScript to do the kind of things you want to do. Very often it's simple DOM manipulation. Very often you can reuse the libraries that are on the page itself, so you can, if they've used jQuery, you can use jQuery in your tests. And the way that we use JavaScript is by casting the driver to a JavaScript executor. We're going to look at the code later on and show you why we have to do that, but essentially most of the drivers will extend the remote WebDriver. And the remote WebDriver has the ability to act as a JavaScript executor. And when it acts as a JavaScript executor, we have two methods available to us. We can execute a script, and we can execute a script asynchronously using execute async script. Now we're going to cover these in more detail later on, but the basic difference is execute script executes a script and returns a value. Execute async script will either time out or stops executing that script when a callback function is called by the JavaScript we're executing. Both of these functions take the script that we're executing, so we write a text string that has the JavaScript that we want to execute, and we can pass arguments into the scripts. And we pass the arguments, so when we use the arguments in the JavaScript, we use them as an array of called arguments. So you can see the next line there, arguments, square bracket index is how we access the arguments that have been passed in. So arguments 0 is the first argument that I have passed in. When we return a value back, we have to call the JavaScript expecting an object to come back, and then we cast that object into the type of value that we're expecting to be returned. So if we return an HTML element, we'll get a web element back. If we return a decimal from JavaScript, we'll get a double. If we return a number, we'll get a long. If we return a boolean, we get a boolean. If we return an array, then we get a list of objects. Otherwise, we get a string back, or null if nothing's returned. And the JavaScript that we execute runs in an anonymous function, which means that nothing is left behind when we run the JavaScript, unless we add variables into the global scope, or add scripts into the global scope. So if we start adding variables onto the window, or we start adding scripts, functions, onto the window itself, then they will be left behind if we start doing that. And that may be something that's useful to you. We're going to demonstrate that when we show the execute async script. But normally, if you keep your variables local, and you keep your functions local, everything will be tidied up after running your JavaScript execution. You have to take deliberate steps to have a side effect in your actual test. So here is an example test using this. The next session we're going to drop down at the code and see this live, but again I'm showing you the annotated example. So we do the normal thing, go to the page, then you can see that I have cast the driver to a JavaScript executor. Then you can see later on I'm using a JS execute script and I'm calling a draw function. Now that draw function is actually part of the application. So here I'm executing JavaScript that is on the page to get it to draw something on the canvas. So we're going to see that in action, and I'm going to drop down through the JavaScript a bit. But it's fairly simple in the sense that all you're doing is writing some script and having it executed. What's hard is you have to learn some JavaScript in order to do this. You have to learn how to handle the arguments and the return values. Now I'm just going to run through the example test that I've used that you saw annotated there. Now we're going to run through it live. I'm going to do this in debug mode because this is nice and visual, so we'll see something happen as we do it. Okay, so this is our canvas page. I don't think you've seen this one before, but I built this one for experimenting with JavaScript. So you can see here that what we have is a form, and the form, when you select positions and sizes and shapes and colors and do show, it will draw a shape on there. Now it says here that we have a command draw and a command clear, and our test is about to do a draw, so issue a draw command. So if I step through here, So what I have done there is I have executed the draw function in this page, and it has done exactly the same as if I had triggered it from the GUI. So now let's look at this in more detail and see if we can see what's happening. So what we have done is we have cast the driver down to a JavaScript executor. Every other command here is the same. You've seen this before. Then I execute a script. That's all I'm doing. So how do we know that a driver can be cast to a JavaScript executor? I mean, you know because I've told you, you may have read it in the documentation, but for future purposes, how do we know what the functionality of these drivers is? Well, a driver is a WebDriver, so we'll start there. So a WebDriver extends a search context. Search context, we go no further with that. So it's not part of the WebDriver interface, this JavaScript executor. So I'm going to go off to the actual driver itself. We're using Firefox driver. And up here I can see that a Firefox driver implements a couple of interfaces. It certainly isn't those interfaces. So let's have a look at Remote WebDriver. Now Remote WebDriver implements WebDriver, JavaScript executor, finds by ID, finds by class name, etc. So this is how we know what the capabilities of a remote WebDriver are. By actually looking through the code, because new stuff will be added into WebDriver as we go through. So I can see here there's a JavaScript executor. And the JavaScript executor, when we look at it, has two methods, execute script and execute async script, and copious documentation. So let's go back to our example. So I'm using execute script. Let's see what the documentation tells us about that. So here we learn that the execute script returns an object. So if we are expecting return value, we say object, whatever variable we give it, equals js.executeScript. And we will have to cast that object to be what we're expecting. So it tells you here, when it executes the script, if it's a return value, it will be converted into a Java object. An HTML element becomes a web element, decimal, double, etc., etc. We can also see that for execute script, we pass in a string which represents the script and an array for the arguments. And it's an object array. We can pass in whatever we want in here, and they will be converted into JavaScript for us automatically. So the arguments must be a number, boolean, string, web element, or a list of the above combination. I mean, you can experiment and see what meets your needs when you come on to having to do those kind of level of tests. And that's pretty much it. So given that basic knowledge, during the exercises, you can experiment with this a bit and try the arguments, because it's important that you learn not just by seeing exactly how it works. That's why we get you to do it first, so that you fail, you experiment a little bit, you learn from your experience, then I'll show you the answers. I think it's also worth us looking at the application itself in a little bit more detail. So this is the front end. The GUI is pretty simple. We've got a canvas over here, a form. I can click things here. Stuff happens. I'll clear that. Click. Great. And we've got a list of actions over here. There's a basic list of hints and tips. We've got a draw command. We've got a clear command. We pass in 1 is the shape for a circle, 0 for a square. Color takes an RGB string. Then we've got the size in pixel and the XY coordinates in pixels over a 300 by 300 canvas. And let's have a look at the actual application itself. So I'm going to do inspect element with Firebug. That will take me into Firebug. I have a script tab. So I'm just going to reload that and get the script in here. So all our scripts are actually contained within the HTML itself. So I could have just done HTML and look at the script. So you can see we're using jQuery, and this is the main code for the application. So I put in some helpful links for you if you do want to test this. But you can see we basically have a draw function. This is at the root level. And what it does is it adds some graphics onto the canvas and writes something into the li for the list. Clear canvas clears the clear canvas clears the canvas. So while this command clear is telling me that that will clear it, I have a clear canvas function. So I can jump down now into the console. So in the console, if I do what the application says and do a clear, nothing happens. If I do what the actual application says in the code and do a clear canvas, then it will clear the canvas. So as ever, documentation is not reliable, code is reliable. And what I'm doing here in this console is I'm executing arbitrary JavaScript. So I can do the same thing as I did over here. So I can type in draw 1, 150, 150, 40, and then the color FF1C0A, and I'm executing JavaScript. And this console, which comes with I think all the browsers now, allows you to test your JavaScript before you put it in your test. It allows you to work with and manipulate the application before you put it in the test. If you want to learn more about these things, then go online, have a look in the console, see how it works. You can put in breakpoints as well into the scripts if you want to trigger it and debug through and see what happens. But this is what we have to do when we're automating applications, particularly those that use JavaScript. If we want to write custom JavaScript, we can test it in the console before we use it. We're not just limited to working things through in our test code. We can work within the application itself. So these are the JavaScript executor exercises. These may prove a challenge. I have tried not to give away the answer in the questions, but we'll see how well I did at that. Now all of this is taking place on the Canvas page that you just saw. So compendium-dev.co.uk/selenium/canvas_basic.html. And what I want you to do is write a test which calls the draw function using arguments with the execute script method and assert that what you wanted was drawn. Issue the commands through the console and you'll see what happens and you'll see what to assert on. Next thing is basic JavaScript. Could be done pretty much on any page where you execute a script which adds 2 arguments and then just assert on the result. So this is basically checking that you can return results from the execute script function. Try and pass in a web element as an argument and then use jQuery to hide it. The Canvas page has jQuery in there, so all you have to do is use it. And the clue to using jQuery, if you haven't used it already, is that this statement here, the $ brackets, quote, body quote, bracket, dot hide, that functionality, that is what you would use to hide the body in HTML. So the argument there is the body string, which is the tag, and then you use jQuery to hide it. I'm hoping that it's not too much of a leap there to see where you would put the web element as an argument, but you have to pass the web element through into the JavaScript, the execute JavaScript function as a parameter, and use the arguments in your JavaScript in order to hide it, and then assert that it is hidden. Then, for bonus points, this could be a bit harder. I want you to create a test which adds some JavaScript onto the page and then demonstrate that it persists beyond the anonymous function execution. So we know that when we run JavaScript, it runs an anonymous function, and that it should not be there when we try and call it again. So your job is to try and figure out how to add a function into the page which you can call multiple times between the execute script calls. So give that your best shot, see how you get on, and have a look at my answers when you come back. If you don't know JavaScript very well, then you'll probably have to do some web searching to figure this stuff out, but that too will be good for you. So all my tests are running, but let me just run them here so that you see. Hopefully that was fun. Hopefully you played a bit with that and experimented a little bit. I will show you what I did in just a second. Okay, so those alerts were the result of me adding a function onto the global page and calling it to create alerts. So hopefully you managed to do that as well. So let's run through these tests. Okay, so the tests I'm using are basically going off to the canvas basic.html, and before each test I refresh the page, because remember I am messing around with JavaScript here. I am adding functions in. I don't really want that to contaminate the application for the next tests, so I do a refresh on the page to set it back to the default each time. So we were asked to figure out how to call the draw function with arguments that we're passing in from the test. So let me just debug this test and we'll step through it. So what this test is doing, we have the page, then I'm finding the command list. So the command list is this stuff over here, where we're seeing the list of things that was going on. Because I need to be able to assert that something happened. And I can't do that through the canvas, because we haven't got any hooks into the canvas. However, I have created this list to allow us to hook in to see what the test is doing. Now I am creating a loop, so I'm going to loop through this 10 times, and each time I'm going to pass in as an argument into the draw function for the x and y statement the test loop, but we're going to increment it by 20, or times it by 20 each time. So that will give me 0 times 20, then 1 times 20, then 2 times 20, so it's going to go 0, 0, 20, 20, 40, 40, 60, 60, and that will give me a nice set of squares coming down on a line here. And I'm constructing a color as we go through, so they will have slightly different shades. Then, when the test finishes, I check how many things were in the command list, and check that we have 10 more commands. So let's have a quick look at this. Let's run through, make sure that's what it does. So we know that there are 2 things in that list. Then I'm going to loop through, drawing a square as we go. And you can see that because I've got this slightly that better, now it won't move. You can see now the squares being added and the actions being added. Then come to the end of the loop. I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 actions in that list, and the test will pass. So I don't know if you experimented with loops or how you did it, but hopefully you did something like this where In your script, you reference the arguments that you want. I'm passing in 3 parameters, and they are passed through into my JavaScript as arguments 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2. So to return the values from JavaScript. Now this essentially, and this could be done on any page, essentially I'm just executing the JavaScript where I return argument 0 plus argument 1. So this is argument 0, this is argument 1, it will return 40. And because it will return as a long, I'm asserting it against 40L, which gives me a long instead of an integer. Prior to doing that, I just created a demonstration of returning 10 as you saw in the example. As you saw in the exercise description, return 10, just taking it's a 10L to make sure that the exercise works. In the exercises, you saw we had the execute script, document title argument 0. That's what this is testing, and basically document.title arguments 0 means that set the document title to whatever we're passing in as the first parameter. So the document title will be set to Bob, so we assert that. Now the use of jQuery. This is the code that was in the exercise, where basically I execute the jQuery command, then I assert that the commands is no longer displayed. So I start by going, is the commands displayed? Yes. I hide the body, then check if the commands is there. It isn't. I know that I managed to execute a jQuery hide on the body. The next step was to then replace body with our passed in web element. So what I'm doing is instead of the body, I'm putting an argument in this place, and I'm adding in instead not the body any longer, but the commands list. So the only thing that will disappear is the commands list. So let's run this test and see what happens. So that's our page up. We have checked that the commands list is displayed. I'm getting the commands list as a web element and passing it into my JavaScript to hide it, which it does. So then I can assert, is it displayed? Answer no, test passes. Then you had the challenge. Could you leave some JavaScript behind? The JavaScript is run as an anonymous function. That basically means everything is within the scope of that anonymous function. When the function executes, none of that code is left lying around. We have run some JavaScript on the page but haven't invaded it. That's good for testing because we're not interfering with the application. I am deliberately asking you to do that. And the reason I am asking you to do that is because sometimes if the developers do not give you enough hooks into the application, do not make it testable, sometimes you have to make it testable before they do, so that you can get your test running in the knowledge that they will add those hooks in, and when they do, your test continues to run. So the way that I am doing this here is I have decided that an alert is a very visible thing to inject and check for, and there were no alerts in that canvas example, so any alerts that appear are ones that I have added. So the first thing I do is just to double check that I can still execute an alert. I do an execute script that triggers an alert with this text, alert triggered by WebDriver. Then I check that that alert appears, then I dismiss it with an accept OK. Then what I want to do is double check that I can do the same thing, but instead of doing it from within the script, I want to add a function into the page that will do that. So here's my code. I create a WebDriver alert, which is a function, and I add it onto the window so it's part of the global scope. And my function does the creation of an alert for me. So this line creates the function in the global scope, then this line calls that function. So the alert will appear with this text, and then we accept it to get rid of it. Now, if I have not managed to put the results of this execute script into the global space, if I try and do this window WebDriver alert.call again, it will fail. If I have managed to put the window WebDriver alert into the global space, then a call to that function will cause the alert to appear. So let me debug this for you. So our first test has executed the alert. Now we're going to dismiss it. So it's no longer on that page. So now this next function, or this next execute script, will create a function and execute it. Let's get rid of that dialog. Now if we did not manage to persist that function, a call here will result in no alert being triggered. So the fact that it is triggered and the fact that it is this text means that when we added this function into WebDriver Alert, we managed to put it into the global space, and that's what's happening here. Now sometimes that can be useful if you want to inject things into the page and run them from different parts of your test. That's the way to do it. Tag them onto the window or stick them in the global space some other method, or create a hook into jQuery or some other library that's in there. And we're going to look at that when we use the async JavaScript. So we know that the JavaScript executor has two main methods, execute script and execute async script. Execute async script, when we call it from WebDriver, an additional argument is added in to the script by WebDriver as a final argument. So you can see here, var callback equals arguments, argument.length -1, get the last argument. That is a callback function that we have to call from JavaScript to tell WebDriver that our asynchronous execution has finished. If we do not do that, then execute async script will time out and give a timeout exception. If you call the callback function with an argument, then that argument will be the return value that is sent to WebDriver. And remember, HTML elements become web elements, number become long, etc., the same as before. So again, we call it expecting an object and cast appropriately. If it times out, clearly nothing will be returned because an exception was thrown. Now before we execute async script, we have to make sure that we set the script timeout. Script timeout is set by default to 0. So if we do not set the script timeout, then our execute async JavaScript will immediately time out and it won't work. So make sure you set the script timeout before you call it. Now that's the basic theory for execute async JavaScript. Because the arguments are the same, the parameters are the same, there's just an extra argument comes in and we have to call the callback. So I'm going to show you this in the terms of a code. I haven't written any exercises around this. To be honest, I don't use execute async very much. I have used it for synchronizing with Ajax, but I can use the WebDriver wait and create unexpected condition to do much the same thing. I find the execute async JavaScript what I use in extreme circumstances, when I cannot use the simpler synchronization aspects that WebDriver provides. So in the next session we're going to look at the actual code that I've written to execute this, to explain this, and we'll go through it in more detail. Let's look at execute async in more detail. So remember this page, selenium/basicajax.html, and when we choose one of these categories, it goes off to the server and brings back the JSON to populate this value. Now one thing we could use execute async for is to wait for that little GIF to go away. And I'm sure there are dozens of ways of doing this. I have chosen a particular way of doing this that I think exposes some useful techniques with the execute script and the async JavaScript. I'm just going to put this side by side just now. Don't really need it, but it might help a bit. So let me explain this first. So we go off to the page, you know that. We cast down the driver to get a JavaScript executor, you know that. We set the script timeout. We have to do this before we execute the async script, otherwise it will time out straight away. You already saw an example where I add a function into the global space. Well, I'm doing that here. And the reason I'm doing that here is that if we look in this application, and look at the code. So what we can see happening, this is very simple code. Essentially, when the value in combo 1 changes, when this changes, then it shows the Ajax busy GIF, then it goes off and makes a request to the server to get the JSON back, which it can then use to populate this, then it hides the Ajax busy GIF. Now these are jQuery functions. There is no onHide JavaScript event that I can use to hook into. So what I've chosen to do in the test is override this or extend this jQuery function. That's what this code here is doing. Basically it's saying get the jQuery hide function and add it into this variable. Then make this the new jQuery hide function. So it's going to run my jQuery hide function. And basically what I do, actually I don't need that. So this code was, I found this code basically on Stack Exchange, very useful place for getting information. I don't actually need that example code, because what we're going to do, so I didn't need that code because in the Stack Overflow question they were discussing how to trigger your custom onHide events. I don't want to trigger a custom onHide event. What I'm doing here is I am extending the jQuery hide function with my own, which will call the old jQuery hide function, and then once it is hidden, my WebDriver callback function will be called. So you can see here, I initially make this WebDriver callback function just an empty function that doesn't do anything. That's just to make sure there's no JavaScript errors or no problems in here. Then I basically stick this, the call for this function, inside the jQuery method. So when the jQuery hide happens by my application code, my callback is also called. So I set that up with an execute script before I click on the combo box down here. Then you can see after I've clicked on the combo box, I do an execute async script. And what I do with that is the callback function, which is given in the arguments list, remember, all I do is assign that callback function to the window.WebDriver callback that we have already said will be used by jQuery. So I am making jQuery, after it hides the element, call the WebDriver callback functionality. Now that's why in this test I make sure that I refresh the page, because again I'm messing with the JavaScript. But this is for a very specific synchronization example. So what should happen is that we pull this down, we trigger off the Ajax, we override the callback function so that when the hide functionality is executed and the GIF goes away, our callback is triggered and our test carries on. So let's run it and see if that works. So this is using both the JavaScript functions where we inject our JavaScript code, then hook it into jQuery so that when that GIF goes away, we return back to our test. I just want to demonstrate that that's what this is doing. So here in the code, if I say run this function, WebDriver, which doesn't exist, let's call that just to make sure there's no nulls, although I don't think I really need to do that. So now I have overridden the jQuery hide functionality and it will call this method. But when we call it with WebDriver, our callback function is a different place on the global place, so will not be called by jQuery. So it should be the case that our execute async script times out after 10 seconds. So let me run this test to double check that that's what happens. So there we go, we've overridden it. It's gone away 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There you go, human stopwatch. And we got a timeout exception. Timeout exception, error timed out waiting for async. There we go. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how the async functionality works. The rest of it with the parameters and the return codes is the same as the execute script, but we must call this callback function in order to have it complete. So I think what we'll do before we leave the async script is just have a quick look at the Java docs for this, because they do give some useful information in terms of the examples that are put in place. The example I particularly like is the use of the XML HTTP request. Now I could have done that in here because this code over here is making an XML HTTP request to get the JSON back. And what this example is doing is calling essentially this type of method and pulling back the JSON and processing it. So this shows that you can, within your test, bypass the GUI to execute some of the underlying AJAX calls that are going on. It's quite a nice, I like this because it's quite a nice little sneaky example. I think there might be a syntax error in this code. I think you might need a semicolon in here in the JavaScript to make this work, but that's a nice little example in here. I quite like that one. Now this example here, what this basically does is this says we're going to press a compose button. Great. It clicks it. Great. Now clicking this button will obviously cause this compose window widget to open. Now fortunately for the people who are testing this application, this is triggering an onload event, which is great because they can hook into that and say when this widget loads, call the WebDriver callback functionality. That's how this piece of async works. With the example code that I had here, I didn't have the ability to pass in my callback functionality as standard JavaScript stuff, so I had to override the existing jQuery code in order to do something as simple as this. So it's worth spending some time copy and pasting this example, and if you want, in fact, as an exercise, why don't you take this example and make it work on this page, the basic AJAX page. Your exercise for the execute async script is to basically use the Javadoc and look at two of these samples there and create tests for them. So the test which uses the sleep sample code, turn that into a JUnit test and assert on the elapsed time. Then the sample for the XML HTTP request, turn that into a test which uses the Selenium /Ajax select.php page, which is called by the basic Ajax HTML page. I want you to call the Ajax select.php directly. Now that takes an ID as a URL argument, so you'll have to add that into the call as well. And use the Javadoc sample as the basis for your test, and then assert on some of the strings that come back in the JSON query. So you're basically using this documentation, then turning this into a test, and instead of just system.out.print, you're going to assert on this difference. And then with this XML HTTP request, you're going to make this call the Ajax select.php, and you're going to add an argument in here in the URL to make it work properly. Then instead of you don't have to parse the string into a JSON object, you can use the string object directly and just check that, I don't know, it contains the option value string or something, one of the string elements that is returned. Just assert on that. Now there's a couple of subtleties in here, so do the exercise, see how you get on, then we'll debrief afterwards. Okay, how did you do with that? So the subtleties were, did you remember to set the script timeout? I'm sure you copy and pasted, it didn't work. Add the set script timeout, and I'm sure your test just flew at that point. Did you have any syntax errors in the Javadoc code? There were a couple when I did it. Certainly this would not work without putting the brackets round, because otherwise it's treating it as a string when it needs to be the long in order to do the check. And in the JavaScript call, I needed an extra semicolon down here. So let's look at these tests. So to turn the sleep into a test, I basically just copy and pasted this. Remember to set the script timeout. And I did an assert that the current time minus the start was greater than the 500 milliseconds that we told it to wait for. And you can see that in the run that I did, I got an elapsed time of 522 seconds. So that test passed. Then, in the use XML HTTP request, so I had to change the call. So I basically made a call to Selenium /Ajax select.php with the URL parameter ID equal to 2. Didn't have to change anything else. Then the response that comes back, I cast it into a string. There I'm printing it out, but here in order to assert on it, I cast it into a string, then assert that it contains the string, option value 10, option display C++, which is part of this JSON call that was returned. So hopefully your tests are very similar to that. It is worth using the Javadocs that come with WebDriver, trying out the examples, seeing how it works, because sometimes there's missing information in the Javadoc. The Javadoc I don't think mentions set script timeout in the context of the execute async script method. So sometimes you have to do some web searching to get these things hanging together. But if you're struggling to make something work, and there is an example in the Javadoc, use that and try and get that working, because that is supposed to work clean, and that will help you debug and understand where you're going wrong if you think you're having problems using WebDriver.